The 5:30 a.m. light in Gary, Indiana, wasn't the gentle, promising glow you see in movies. It was a bruised industrial purple, filtered through a haze that never quite seemed to lift. It seeped through the thin blinds of Alara Vance's small apartment, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the silence. For Alara, at 38, silence was the loudest sound. It was the shape of the empty half of her bed, the echo in the coffee pot that brewed for one, the phantom weight of a life that had been violently amputated 5 years ago. Marcus, her husband, the man whose laughter had been loud enough to fill stadiums, now reduced to a ghost in her memory and a single smiling photograph on her refrigerator. Dead at 33 in a fiery wreck on the I-90. A slick road, a tired truck driver. A story as common and as brutal as the Gary steel mills rusting by the lake. Her body ached. The long hours of her night shift doing clerical work at Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch, a powerhouse law firm in Chicago, were catching up to her. It was a good job, a stable job, the kind of job Marcus had always encouraged her to keep. "You're inside the machine, Ellie," he'd say, his eyes crinkling. "You see how the gears turn." She'd never understood what he meant, not really. To her, it was just data entry, filing, and trying to stay invisible in the gleaming glass and mahogany world of millionaire lawyers. A world away from her reality in Gary. The daily commute was a study in contrasts, from the potholed streets and shuttered storefronts of her neighborhood to the polished marble and valet parking of downtown Chicago. Two different Americas, connected by a 60-minute train ride. Today was different. Today she wasn't heading to the city. It was Saturday. A day for chores. Specifically, the chore she'd been dreading for 5 years, clearing out Marcus's things from the storage unit. The monthly bill was a drain, a reminder she couldn't afford to keep paying for a space occupied by ghosts. The storage facility smelled of damp concrete and forgotten time. Unit 217. The metal door groaned in protest as she rolled it up, revealing the neatly stacked boxes of a life interrupted. Old vinyl records, a collection of vintage cameras, a box of t-shirts that still, faintly, smelled of him. She worked methodically, sorting into keep, donate, and trash. It was a mechanical, numbing process until she reached his large red toolbox. Marcus had loved his tools. He could fix anything. She opened the lid to sort the wrenches and sockets. It felt heavier than it should. Running her hand along the bottom, her fingers caught on a slight imperfection in the metal lining, a seam. Prying at it with her fingernail, she felt a click, a false bottom. Her breath caught. It seemed like something out of a spy movie, too dramatic for her Marcus, the man who loved bad comedies and burnt barbecue. Inside the hidden compartment, nestled in the custom-cut foam, were 2 items, a cheap disposable burner phone and a small black external hard drive, no bigger than a credit card. It had no brand name, no markings at all. A jolt of something, not grief, but a cold, sharp curiosity, shot through her. Why would Marcus, a simple construction project manager, need a secret compartment with a burner phone and an untraceable hard drive? She told herself it was nothing, a silly boy's secret. Maybe he'd bought it for a friend, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She slipped the hard drive into her pocket and slammed the toolbox shut, leaving the phone behind. That night, the quiet of her apartment felt different. It was no longer empty, it was menacing. She sat at her small kitchen table, the hard drive lying in front of her like a dark omen. She didn't have the right cables to connect it, and her old laptop probably wouldn't have the software to read it anyway. It was just a piece of plastic. She was being paranoid. She went to bed around 11, exhaustion finally winning out over anxiety. She dreamed of Marcus, but it wasn't a comforting dream. He was standing across a busy street, beckoning to her, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. The dream was shattered by a sound from the real world, a faint creak from her living room. Her eyes snapped open. The apartment was pitch black. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was an old building. It made noises. She told herself to breathe. Then she heard it again. A soft, deliberate footstep on the worn hardwood floor. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. This was not the building settling. Someone was inside her apartment. She slid silently from the bed, her feet barely touching the floor. Her mind raced. The phone was on the nightstand, but the intruder was between her and it. The fire escape was outside the living room window, also blocked. The only option was the closet. She slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut, leaving only a hairline crack to see through. She held her breath, listening. A thin beam of a penlight cut through the darkness, methodically scanning the room. The intruder was professional, silent, not a clumsy burglar looking for a TV. They moved with a purpose that terrified her more than any noise could. They weren't tossing things. They were searching. The beam swept over her dresser, paused on her nightstand. Then, the figure moved out of her bedroom and into the living room. She heard the soft clink of them searching the kitchen, the rustle of papers on her desk. They were looking for something specific. Ilara pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Her blood ran cold as a single, horrifying thought solidified in her mind. It wasn't a random break-in. It wasn't about her jewelry or the petty cash in a kitchen jar. They were here for the same reason she'd gone to the storage unit. They were here for Marcus's things. They were here for the hard drive. And the realization that followed was even more terrifying. This little piece of plastic wasn't just a secret. It was a danger that had just walked into her home, a danger that was now hunting for it in the dark. And she was trapped in a closet, clutching the very thing it was willing to kill for. The longest night of Ilara's life ended with the click of the apartment's front door closing and the subsequent, deafening silence. She remained in the closet for what felt like an eternity, muscles screaming until the bruised purple of dawn finally returned. When she emerged trembling, she found her apartment meticulously, unnervingly tidy. The intruder hadn't stolen a thing. They hadn't found what they were looking for. It was a message. We can get to you. We will be back. Calling the police was her first instinct, but it died before it even formed. She could already hear the conversation in her head. A call from her side of Gary, reporting a break-in where nothing was taken. The tired, dismissive tone, the slow response time. They would file a report that would go nowhere. They wouldn't understand the cold, professional dread that now clung to her apartment's air. The system wasn't built to protect her. It was built to process her. Her mind raced, searching for an anchor in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. And it landed on the one place she knew that was the polar opposite of her life. The gleaming, powerful, and confidential world of Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch. And within that world, there was one person. Jordan Reed. Jordan was a junior associate at the firm, sharp, ambitious, and, like Ilara, a black woman navigating a predominantly white, male institution. She was in her late 20s, with a confidence that Ilara, a decade her senior, both admired and was intimidated by. Jordan had to be smarter, work harder, and dress sharper than her peers just to be considered their equal. Ilara saw it in the way the senior partners would talk over her in meetings, in the way she was given the grunt work on major cases. But Jordan never buckled. She met it all with a cool, unshakable competence. They had a quiet, unspoken understanding, a nod in the hallway, a shared brief smile in the elevator. It wasn't a friendship, but it was a flicker of recognition in a place where Ilara often felt invisible. Taking the hard drive with her, clutching it in her coat pocket, Ilara took the morning train to Chicago. Walking into the firm's opulent lobby, she felt more out of place than ever. The air smelled of money and expensive perfume. She wasn't wearing her uniform, she was just a civilian, and the security guard's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. She found Jordan in her small, sterile office, surrounded by stacks of legal binders. Ilara? Jordan looked up, surprised. Is everything okay? Words tumbled out of Ilara's mouth. The storage unit, the false bottom, the hard drive, the break-in. She laid the small black rectangle on Jordan's polished desk. It looked insignificant, an alien object in this temple of law and order. Jordan listened intently, her face a mask of professional neutrality. But Ilara could see the flicker of alarm in her eyes. She was processing the information like a lawyer, assessing risk. You're saying someone broke into your home last night, didn't steal anything, and you think they were after this? Jordan tapped the drive with a perfectly manicured nail. I know it sounds crazy, Ilara said, her voice trembling. But I have nowhere else to go. I can't trust the police with this. You work with confidential things every day. I thought maybe you could help me see what's on it, safely. Jordan's internal conflict was palpable. This was a massive career-ending risk. Helping an employee with a personal, potentially criminal matter using firm resources was grounds for immediate dismissal. She had fought too hard to get here, but as she looked at Alara, a woman she saw every day, a woman whose quiet dignity she respected, she also saw the raw, undiluted fear. It was the same fear she sometimes felt herself, the fear of being powerless against a system not designed for you. "Okay," Jordan said finally, her voice low. "Okay, but this stays between us, completely. Meet me here after hours, 9 o'clock. No one will be on this floor." That night, the law office was a ghost town. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed a glittering, indifferent Chicago skyline. Inside Jordan's office, the only light came from her computer monitor. She pulled out a sleek, firm-issued laptop. "This is a sandboxed machine," she explained, her voice all business. "Completely firewalled. If there's anything malicious on the drive, it can't infect our network or be traced." She plugged the drive in. A dialog box popped up. "Encryption detected. Enter passphrase." Ilara's heart sank. "I don't know it." "Let's try the basics," Jordan murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She tried Marcus's birthday, their anniversary, Ilara's name. Nothing. She moved on to more complex patterns, running a decryption script she'd acquired in a cybersecurity law seminar. The program whirred, cycling through algorithms. Minutes stretched into an hour. The screen was a cascade of failing attempts. "It's no use," Jordan sighed, leaning back. "This is military-grade encryption. We're not getting in." Defeat washed over Ilara. It was over. She would take the drive, throw it in the river, and try to forget any of this had ever happened. She stood up to leave, her shoulders slumped. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. The screensaver had come on, a picture of a nebula, a swirl of stars. Stars. "Try Andromeda," she said. Jordan looked at her, confused. "It was his favorite constellation," Ilara explained. "He had a tattoo of it, on his back. He called it his map, home." Jordan's expression softened. She typed in the word Andromeda. She hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a green bar flashed across the screen. "Decryption successful." A single folder appeared on the desktop, labeled Insurance. They both stared, breathless. Jordan double-clicked it. The folder opened, revealing a dozen video files and a single protected spreadsheet. She clicked on the first video file. Dated almost a year after Marcus's funeral. The video player opened. The quality was grainy, like it was filmed with a hidden camera. It showed a man sitting at an outdoor cafe, his back mostly to the camera. He turned his head slightly to talk to someone off-screen. His hair was different, lighter, and he wore glasses she'd never seen before. But the profile, the line of his jaw, the way he gestured with his hands as he spoke, it was unmistakable. It was Marcus. He was alive. The camera zoomed in slightly as if the person filming was trying to get a better look. The date stamp in the bottom right corner was crystal clear. It was from 4 years ago. 1 year after she had identified a body so badly burned, she had only recognized it from a small mole on his neck. 1 year after she had buried him. The man on the screen laughed, a silent, ghostly motion. It was her husband, alive and well, a year after his own death. The foundation of Ilara's world didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. The silence in Jordan's office was absolute, broken only by the hum of the laptop. Ilara stared at the screen, at the ghost of her husband laughing in the sun, and felt a profound, disorienting vertigo. Grief was a familiar pain, a heavy blanket she had learned to live under. This new feeling was sharp, serrated, and terrifying. It was the realization that her grief itself, the most profound, defining experience of her last 5 years, was a lie. That's impossible," she breathed, the words tasting like ash. Jordan, ever the lawyer, had already moved past the shock and was in analysis mode. "Impossible is a matter of opinion, Ilara. What we're looking at is data." She quickly minimized the video and opened the spreadsheet file. It was a ledger, columns of names, dates, cities, and occupations. It read like a cryptic business plan. Leo Sterling, 08-14-2016, Detroit MI loan officer. Caleb Thorne, 05/22/2017, Chicago, IL, oncologist. Isaac Webb, 01/30, 2018, Cleveland, OH, insurance adjuster. Nathan Price, 11/10/2018, St. Louis, MO, bank manager. And at the very top of the list, one entry that made Ilara's blood run cold. Marcus Vance, 07/19/2019, Gary, in, clerical, law firm. Her own husband. Her own job title listed next to his name. She wasn't his wife. She was a line item, an asset. The phrase he'd always used echoed in her mind. You're inside the machine, Ellie. You see how the gears turn. He hadn't been encouraging her. He'd been scouting her. He was targeting women, Jordan said, her voice a low, grim whisper. Women with specific access. Banking, insurance, medical, and law. Ilara felt a wave of nausea. Her entire marriage, the sweet courtship, the tender moments, all of it replayed in her mind, now tainted with a sinister, transactional sheen. His innocent questions about her work, about the firm's clients, about who was suing whom, it had all been intelligence gathering. Who is Leo Sterling? Ilara asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was the only way to keep from screaming. Jordan's fingers flew across the keyboard. A few clicks, and she was searching public records. A news article from a Detroit paper popped up. The headline read, "Local man lost in tragic boating accident." The article detailed the death of Leo Sterling, a beloved husband and community member whose boat had capsized on Lake St. Clair. His body was never recovered, and there, next to the headline, was a photo. A smiling man with his arm around a blonde woman. The man was Marcus. "That's her," Ilara said, pointing at the woman. "Brianna Sterling, the loan officer." The puzzle pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of monstrous deception. Marcus, or whatever his real name was, hadn't just faked his death once. He was a professional chameleon, a predator who married women, integrated himself into their lives, used their professional access for some unknown scheme, and then staged his own death to disappear and move on to the next target. And she was the last one on the list. The final widow. "We have to talk to her," Ilara said, a new hard resolve cutting through her shock. "Brianna, she's the first one. She might know something. She has to." Jordan hesitated. "Ilara, this is dangerous. We're not detectives. The man who broke into your apartment is part of this. If they were willing to kill Leo Sterling—" "They didn't kill him," Ilara interrupted, her voice sharp. "He is Leo Sterling. He's still out there. And Brianna is a victim, just like me. We have to warn her." The logic was undeniable. The risk was enormous, but the alternative, doing nothing, leaving another woman in the dark, was unthinkable. They made a decision. It was nearly midnight, but Detroit was only a 4-hour drive. They would leave now. The drive east on I-94 was a blur of highway lights and shared, tense silence. They fueled themselves with bad gas station coffee, the hard drive now stored in a hidden compartment in Jordan's briefcase. Hope was a fragile, flickering flame. Maybe Brianna had figured it out. Maybe she had answers. Maybe they weren't alone in this nightmare. They pulled onto Brianna Sterling's quiet suburban street in a leafy neighborhood of Detroit just as the sun was beginning to rise. It was a world away from Ilara's corner of Gary, manicured lawns, 2-car garages, American flags fluttering from porches. They found the house, a charming brick colonial, but their flickering hope was instantly extinguished. The house was cordoned off with yellow police tape. A Detroit PD squad car was parked at the curb, its lights off. A black sedan, the kind favored by detectives, was parked behind it. Ilara and Jordan got out of the car, their hearts sinking. They approached the officer standing guard. "Sorry, ladies, this is an active crime scene," he said, holding up a hand. "We're friends of Brianna's," Jordan lied smoothly, her lawyerly composure kicking in. "We drove in from Chicago to see her. What's happened?" The officer's face softened with a hint of pity. "You should talk to the detective." He nodded toward a man in a rumpled suit who was talking on his phone by the black sedan. They waited. When the detective finished his call, he walked over, his eyes tired and cynical. He introduced himself as Detective Miller. "We were just coming to visit," Jordan repeated her story. Miller sighed, running a hand over his face. I'm sorry to have to tell you this. We found Ms. Sterling this morning. Her sister called in a wellness check. Found her? Alara asked, her voice barely a whisper, already knowing the answer. She's deceased, Miller said flatly. Looks like she took her own life. Pills, a note, the whole 9 yards. He paused, looking them over. You said you're friends. Did she seem depressed to you? Mention any trouble? Alara's mind was screaming. It wasn't a suicide. They got to her. They knew we were coming, but she couldn't say that. She looked at Jordan, whose face was a carefully constructed mask of grief. It's a shock, Jordan managed to say. We hadn't heard from her in a few weeks. We were worried. Miller nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, we'll need your contact information for the report. As Jordan gave him her details, Alara's eyes scanned the scene. The quiet street, the drawn curtains on the neighboring houses, the grim finality of the police tape. They had come here seeking an ally, a fellow survivor. Instead, they had found another victim. The message was chillingly clear. This wasn't just about deception and fraud anymore. The people they were up against didn't just disappear their loose ends, they erased them. And now, they were the only 2 people left who knew the truth. The drive back to Chicago was a tomb of silence. The rising sun seemed like a mockery, painting the sky in vibrant colors while Alara and Jordan were trapped in a monochrome world of fear and paranoia. Breonna Sterling's death wasn't a suicide. They knew it with a certainty that chilled them to the bone. It was a message, a brutal and efficient statement. Stop digging. They knew, Alara finally whispered, staring at the endless stretch of freeway. Somehow, they knew we were coming for her. They got there first. Jordan gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Or, her death is what triggered the break-in at your place. Maybe she was getting too close to the truth, so they silenced her. Then they realized she might have told someone, or that there was other evidence out there, evidence that led them to Marcus. And to you. The logic was cold and terrifyingly sound. They were no longer just uncovering a man's secret life. They were stumbling through the graveyard he'd left in his wake. Back in the sterile safety of Jordan's high-rise apartment in the South Loop, a place that felt a million miles and a world of privilege away from Alara's home in Gary, they huddled over the laptop again. The ledger of names was no longer a list of potential allies. It was a list of potential casualties. They focused on the next 2 women, Isaac Webb in Cleveland and Nathan Price in St. Louis. Their names were associated with an insurance adjuster and a bank manager, more access, more gears in the machine. Jordan's legal research skills, honed by years of sifting through dense corporate filings, were now repurposed for a much grimmer task. She dove into public records, news archives, and social media. The pattern that emerged was horrifyingly consistent. Isaac Webb, the insurance adjuster from Cleveland, had been married to a man named Elijah Reed. 2 years into their marriage, Elijah died heroically in a house fire, apparently while trying to save a neighbor's pet. The body was burned beyond recognition. Isaac collected a sizable life insurance payout. A year later, Isaac Webb herself died in a freak car accident. Police ruled it an accident, but the timing was sickening. Nathan Price, the bank manager from St. Louis, had been married to Samuel Cole. Samuel had died of a sudden massive heart attack while on a solo hiking trip. He was only 34. No autopsy was performed due to family objections. Objections likely made by Samuel himself before he disappeared. 18 months later, Nathan Price was the victim of a fatal mugging that the police had chalked up to a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a cleanup operation, Jordan said, her voice strained. He marries them, uses them, fakes his death. And then, a year or 2 later, once the heat is off, his associates tie up the loose end, permanently. Alara felt a cold sweat prickle her skin. She was the final loose end. The break-in wasn't just a warning, it was the first step. The ringing of Jordan's phone made them both jump. The caller ID was an unknown number with a Detroit area code. They exchanged a panicked look. It could be them, Alara mouthed. Jordan took a deep breath, her lawyer face snapping back into place. We can't run, we have to know. She answered, putting the call on speaker. This is Jordan Reed. Ms. Reed, this is Detective Miller, Detroit PD. The voice was gruff, familiar. I'm calling about your friend, Brianna Sterling. Detective, Jordan said, her tone carefully modulated to sound concerned. Have you found something? Maybe, Miller said, and there was a new edge to his voice, a hint of suspicion that hadn't been there before. I've been going through her effects. The suicide note was typed, not her style, according to her sister. And I've been looking at her financials. Turns out, in the last week, she transferred $10,000 to a private investigator. Alara's breath hitched. Brianna hadn't been a passive victim. She had been fighting back. A private investigator? Jordan asked, playing dumb. Why would she do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Miller grunted. The PI said she was spooked, said her husband, Leo, the one who supposedly drowned years ago, she thought she saw him. And she was asking the PI to look into a few other names, people she suspected were connected. Your name was on her call log, Ms. Reed. You were one of the last people she spoke to. So I'm going to ask you again. What did you and Brianna Sterling talk about? This was it, the moment of truth. They could continue to lie, to pretend they were just concerned friends, and hope Miller went away. Or they could take a monumental risk and trust a cop from a city they didn't know. Alara looked at Jordan and gave a single, decisive nod. Detective, Jordan said, her voice steady and clear. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane. My client, Alara Vance, is with me right now, and her dead husband's name was Marcus Vance. He looks exactly like the man in the picture with Brianna Sterling. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. They could hear the faint sound of an office, phones ringing, people talking. You'd better start from the beginning, Miller said finally, the cynicism in his voice replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. They spent the next hour laying it all out. The hard drive, the break-in, the list of names, the pattern of deaths. They sent him a photo of Marcus. Miller was silent for a long time after they finished. So you're telling me we're looking at a serial con man who fakes his own death? And a string of murders disguised as accidents and suicides to cover his tracks, he summarized, his voice grim. Yes, Jordan said, and the only concrete evidence you have is a military-grade encrypted hard drive that you happened to find in a toolbox? Yes, Alara confirmed. Jesus Christ, Miller muttered. He was quiet for another moment. Okay, I'm in. I don't like tidy suicides, and I sure as hell don't like being lied to. But you stay put. Don't go near anyone else on that list. This is a police matter now. I'll start digging from my end. But there's one more thing. What is it? Jordan asked. I got a warrant for Brianna's computer, Miller said. Her last search history, just before she called the PI. She wasn't just looking up names of other potential victims. She was looking up one name, over and over again. A doctor in Chicago. Alara felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The list on the hard drive. Caleb Thorne, 05-22-2017, Chicago, IL, oncologist. Let me guess the name, Jordan said. Dr. Annika Sharma, Miller confirmed. Ring any bells? It was more than a bell. It was a klaxon. The fourth widow wasn't in another state. She was right here, in their city. And if the pattern held, she was either the next target on the killer's list or something far more dangerous. The name Dr. Annika Sharma hung in the air of Jordan's apartment like a toxic vapor. Unlike the other women on the list, who were distant names in other cities, Dr. Sharma was local. She was a tangible threat, or a target, right here in Chicago. A quick search painted a picture of a brilliant, highly respected oncologist at one of the city's top hospitals. She was a rising star in cancer research, lauded in medical journals, a frequent guest on local news segments about public health. She was, by all accounts, a pillar of the community, and according to public records, she was a widow. Her husband, a man named Caleb Thorne, a charismatic wilderness guide, had died in a tragic rock-climbing accident in Colorado 3 years ago. His body had been recovered after a difficult and dangerous search. It was another perfect tragic story. She's the fourth widow, Alara stated, tracing the name on the laptop screen. The pattern says she's next to be cleaned up. Or, Jordan countered, her legal mind always probing for alternatives. She's different. Brianna was searching for her specifically. Why? The other women were just names on Marcus's ledger. Why was Annika Sharma the focus of Brianna's investigation? Detective Miller had urged them to stay put, to let the police handle it. But they both knew the reality of cross-jurisdictional investigations. It would be a slow, bureaucratic nightmare. Miller in Detroit had to convince the Chicago PD to take this seriously, to devote resources to what sounded like a fantastical conspiracy theory. By the time they acted, Dr. Sharma could be dead, or worse. "We have to talk to her," Alara insisted. "We have to warn her. If we just show up as two concerned women, what's the harm? We can feel her out, see if she knows anything." Jordan was hesitant, the risk flashing in her eyes. But Alara's conviction was absolute. She felt a strange, protective urge for this woman she'd never met. Another victim caught in the web, spun by the man she once loved. They decided on a plan. It was simple and perhaps foolish. Jordan would call Dr. Sharma's office, claiming to be a representative from a women's health initiative, wanting to discuss a potential partnership. It was a plausible pretext that would, hopefully, get them a face-to-face meeting. To their surprise, it worked. Dr. Sharma, despite her busy schedule, agreed to a brief meeting the following afternoon. Her office was in a gleaming modern medical pavilion attached to the hospital. It was a world of hushed efficiency, soft lighting, and the faint, clean smell of antiseptic. Dr. Sharma met them in a private consultation room. She was even more impressive in person, tall, elegant, with intelligent, compassionate eyes and a calm, reassuring presence that immediately put patients at ease. She exuded an aura of serene competence. "Ms. Reed, Ms. Vance," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. How can I help your initiative?" Jordan began her carefully rehearsed speech, but Alara couldn't play the part. She cut straight to the chase. "Dr. Sharma," Alara began, her voice steady, "we're not here about a health initiative. We're here because we believe you're in danger." Annika Sharma's professional smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something unreadable, surprise, calculation, passed through her eyes. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Alara took a deep breath and laid it all out. She spoke of her husband, Marcus. She spoke of the other widows, of the faked deaths, of the pattern of suspicious accidents and suicides that followed. She watched the doctor's face for any sign of shock, fear, or recognition. Annika listened with rapt attention, her composure absolute. When Alara finished, the doctor leaned forward, her expression a perfect portrait of sympathetic concern. "My God," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. "That's monstrous. And my Caleb, you're saying he was this man?" "We believe so," Jordan said, stepping in. "We found your name on a list. We think the people he worked with may be tying up loose ends." Annika brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes welling with what appeared to be genuine tears. "I can't believe it. Caleb was the love of my life. He was so full of life, so adventurous. To think it was all a lie." She looked at Alara, a shared tragic bond seeming to form between them. "You poor woman, to have lived with that lie for 5 years. I am so sorry." Her empathy was so convincing, so total, that for a moment, Alara felt a wave of relief. Here was an ally, a powerful, intelligent woman who could help them. She wasn't a target in waiting. She was a fellow survivor. They spent another 20 minutes talking, with Annika asking sharp, insightful questions about the hard drive, about the man who broke into Alara's apartment. She offered to use her own resources, her connections, to help. As they stood to leave, Alara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They weren't alone anymore. "Thank you, doctor," Alara said, truly grateful. "We were so worried." "No," Annika said, taking Alara's hand in both of hers. Her grip was firm, reassuring. "Thank you. You may have just saved my life." As she spoke, her sleeve pulled back slightly. On the table beside her, where she'd been taking notes, was her pen. It wasn't a cheap disposable pen from a pharmaceutical company. It was a fountain pen, a vintage deep mahogany wood grain, Mont Blanc with a distinctive silver clip. Alara froze, her vision tunneled. The sounds of the office faded away. All she could see was that pen. It was identical to the one Marcus had given her for their first anniversary. He'd told her it was a family heirloom, his grandfather's, one of a kind. He'd made a whole story up about it, a beautiful, touching lie. She'd cherished it. It had been in his jacket pocket the day of the crash. The police report had listed it as destroyed in the fire, She looked from the pen back to Annika's face. The compassionate, tear-filled eyes now looked different. The serene composure no longer seemed reassuring. It seemed calculated. The empathy felt like a performance, a flawless, perfectly executed role. This woman wasn't a victim. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. Annika noticed the shift immediately. Her warm smile tightened by a fraction of a millimeter. "Is everything all right, Ms. Vance?" Annika asked, her voice still smooth, but now with an underlying edge of ice. Ilara couldn't speak. She could only nod, pulling her hand away as if she'd been burned. They exchanged the hasty goodbyes and walked out of the office, down the long, sterile corridor. The moment the elevator doors closed, Ilara turned to Jordan, her eyes wide with a new, more profound terror. "It's her," Ilara whispered, her voice shaking. "The pen. Marcus had the same one. He said it was unique. She's not a victim, Jordan." Jordan looked at her, confused. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she's not the next target," Ilara said, the horrifying truth crashing down on her. "She's part of it. She has to be." They stepped out of the elevator into the bustling lobby, the world spinning around them. They had walked into the lion's den to warn the sheep, only to discover the sheep was the lion in disguise. And now, the lion knew they were coming. The revelation in the elevator hit them like a physical blow. The pen wasn't just a clue, it was a paradigm shift. Annika Sharma wasn't a fellow victim or the next target. She was a player. The meticulously crafted performance of the grieving widow, the perfectly feigned shock. It was all an act, a chillingly brilliant one. As they drove away from the medical pavilion, paranoia set in. Every car behind them seemed to be following them. Every passerby seemed to be watching. They had exposed themselves to the very person they should have been hiding from. What was her role? Jordan mused, her mind racing, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle. The list on the drive was Marcus's. The women were all connected to finance, insurance. How does an oncologist fit in? "Access," Ilara said, the word tasting bitter. "She has access to the most vulnerable people in the world, people with terminal illnesses, people whose identities are available." Jordan's eyes widened in horror. My God, he wasn't just stealing identities from credit reports. He was getting them from Annika. Identities of real people who were dying or already dead. No one would ever look for them. It's the perfect source material for creating a ghost. The scope of the conspiracy deepened, becoming more ghoulish and depraved. This wasn't just about money. This was about a sophisticated operation that preyed on death itself, and Annika Sharma was at its heart. They went back to Jordan's apartment, the only place that felt remotely safe. Detective Miller's advice to stay put now seemed less like a suggestion and more like a lifeline. Jordan called him immediately. "She's in on it," Jordan said, without preamble, the moment he answered. She recounted the meeting, the performance, the damning evidence of the pen. Miller was silent for a moment on the other end. "A pen? The DA will laugh that out of court. We need more. We need something concrete that links them." "There's one more thing," Ilara said, remembering a detail from years ago. "Marcus used to talk about his brother. He said he lived in Nigeria, that they weren't close. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him on the phone, talking in low tones. He called him Silas. He said Silas was a computer genius." "Silas?" Miller repeated. "That's not on the drive." "No," Jordan said, pulling up the encrypted files again. "But the metadata might tell us something. The file properties, the IP address of the machine that last modified it. It's a long shot." For the next several hours, Jordan, with Miller on speakerphone providing guidance from his own cybercrime unit, delved into the digital guts of the hard drive. It was a labyrinth of code, but Jordan was relentless. Finally, she found it, a single embedded IP address in the log file of the spreadsheet. It had been scrubbed, but not perfectly. A digital ghost. "I've got it," she said, reading the numbers aloud. "Running it now," Miller grunted. They could hear him typing. "It's masked through a dozen proxies bouncing from here to Romania, but we got a source. An ISP in Chicago. The account is registered to a shell corporation, Prometheus Solutions." A quick search revealed Prometheus Solutions was a tech company with a generic website and no discernible business. Its address was in an industrial park on the far south side of Chicago, a desolate area of sprawling warehouses and empty lots. That's him? That has to be Silas's base of operations, Ilara said. Don't go near it, Miller ordered, his voice sharp. This is where you stop. Let us handle this. We'll set up surveillance. But Ilara and Jordan couldn't just sit and wait. The need to see, to confirm, was overwhelming. Against Miller's explicit orders, they drove to the industrial park that evening. They parked a block away, their car nestled between two semi-trailers, giving them a clear view of the warehouse listed as the address for Prometheus Solutions. The building was unremarkable, a large corrugated metal box with few windows. It looked deserted. For hours they sat in the growing dark, a tense silence filling the car. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe it was just an empty building. Just as they were about to give up, a light flickered on in a second-story window. A few minutes later, a sleek black Audi pulled up to the front entrance. The driver's side door opened. A tall, impeccably dressed woman stepped out. It was Dr. Annika Sharma. Ilara ducked down in her seat, her heart pounding. Jordan grabbed a pair of binoculars from her glove compartment. Annika didn't go inside. She stood by her car looking at her phone. A moment later, the warehouse door opened and a man stepped out. He was slender, with short dreadlocks, and he moved with a nervous, twitchy energy. He looked around, scanning the empty street, before approaching Annika. That's Silas, Ilara whispered, though she had never seen him before. She just knew. The family resemblance to Marcus was faint, but present in the shape of his eyes. From their vantage point, they couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see the dynamic. It wasn't a friendly chat. Annika was doing most of the talking, her gestures sharp and commanding. Silas was listening, nodding, his posture almost deferential. He handed her a small package, which she slipped into her purse. This wasn't a meeting of equals. This was a subordinate reporting to his superior. Ilara fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she tried to take a picture, a video, anything to prove what they were seeing. The distance was too great, the light too poor. The image on her screen was blurry and indistinct. The meeting was brief. Annika got back in her Audi and drove off, her headlights cutting a swath through the darkness. Silas watched her go before retreating back into the warehouse, the heavy door clanging shut behind him. Ilara and Jordan sat in stunned silence. They had found the brother in the shadows, but the revelation was far more terrifying than they had imagined. Silas wasn't the mastermind, the hidden genius pulling the strings. He was a subordinate, a technician. Annika Sharma was the one in charge. She wasn't just a partner in the scheme, she was the architect. The image of Annika Sharma commanding Silas in the desolate industrial park was burned into Ilara's mind. The power dynamic was undeniable. The elegant, respected doctor was the queen, and the shadowy hacker was her pawn. This flipped the entire narrative. Marcus hadn't been the charismatic leader of a criminal enterprise. He'd been an employee, a handsome, effective tool wielded by a far more brilliant and ruthless mastermind. They drove back to Jordan's apartment, the adrenaline of the discovery giving way to a chilling realization. They were in way over their heads. They had a visual confirmation, but no proof. A blurry cell phone picture wouldn't stand up in court. Their testimony was just the word of two women against a celebrated public figure. "We have to get Silas," Jordan said, pacing her living room. "He's the weak link. If we can get him to flip, he can give us everything. He can corroborate the hard drive, expose Annika's role, everything." Ilara called Detective Miller, her hands trembling as she recounted what they had witnessed. She expected him to be furious that they had disobeyed his orders. Instead, he was quiet, listening intently. "So, the doctor is the boss," he said finally, a note of grim respect in his voice. "It makes a sick kind of sense. She has the intelligence, the resources, and the ice in her veins to pull something like this off." He paused. "You were right to go. My request for a surveillance team got tangled in red tape. Would have taken another 48 hours to get approved. By then, they could have been gone." The casual mention of bureaucratic failure was a stark reminder of why Ilara had sought out Jordan in the first place. The system was too slow, too clumsy to catch predators as sophisticated as these. "We need to raid that warehouse, Miller," Jordan urged. "Now, before they realize they've been exposed and scrub the place clean." "I'm already on it," Miller said. "I'm on the first flight to Midway in the morning. I've looped in a contact at the Chicago PD, a guy I trust. We're going to hit that place, and we're going to hit it hard. But I need you two to do something for me. Stay put. For real this time. If Annika suspects anything, Silas is the first person she'll silence, and she doesn't seem like the type to leave a forwarding address. The next day was an agonizing wait. Ilara and Jordan stayed cooped up in the apartment, jumping at every sound. The city outside felt like enemy territory. They knew Annika was out there, moving through her day, saving lives at the hospital while orchestrating a criminal empire, and she knew about them. The thought was suffocating. Late that afternoon, Miller called. "It's time. We're moving in. I'll let you know when it's done." Ilara imagined the scene, a tactical team in full gear descending on the quiet warehouse. The potential for violence was immense. Silas, a man complicit in multiple murders, might not go quietly. She prayed no one would get hurt. She also prayed, with a confusing mix of hatred and pity, that Silas would be taken alive. He was the only one who held the key. Hours crawled by. Evening fell. The city lights began to twinkle, indifferent to the life and death drama unfolding in its industrial underbelly. Finally, around 9 p.m., Jordan's phone rang. It was Miller. "We got him," he said, his voice tired but triumphant. "He's in custody. The place was a server farm, a hacker's paradise. We're bagging and tagging everything. He didn't put up a fight. I think honestly he was relieved." A wave of relief so intense it made Ilara dizzy washed over her. "Did he talk? Is he talking?" "He hasn't shut up since we put the cuffs on him," Miller said. "He's scared of Annika. He's ready to deal. We're taking him to a secure federal facility for a formal interrogation. I think you two should be there, behind the glass. He needs to see you. He needs to know the women his brother wronged are the ones bringing this whole thing down." 2 hours later, they were sitting in a small, dark observation room in a nondescript federal building. On the other side of a one-way mirror, Silas sat at a metal table, looking small and defeated under the harsh fluorescent lights. Miller sat across from him. "Let's start from the beginning, Silas," Miller said, his voice calm. "Tell us about your brother." Silas looked up, his eyes finding his own reflection in the mirror. It felt like he was looking right at them. His name wasn't Marcus, or Leo, or Caleb. It was Daniel Oluwade. He was my older brother. He began to talk, and the full sordid story came pouring out. He and Daniel were tech prodigies, hackers who started with small-time credit card scams. But Daniel was the one with the charisma, the face, the ability to make anyone believe anything. "And Annika," Miller prompted, "how did she find you?" Silas let out a bitter, shaky laugh. "She didn't find us. We found her. Or we thought we did. We were trying a medical insurance scam. Daniel, as Caleb Thorne, was her patient. He was supposed to be charming her, getting access to her records." Silas shook his head in disbelief. "We thought we were playing her, but the whole time, she was playing us. She was 10 steps ahead. She saw Daniel's potential. She saw my skills. She wasn't the target. She was auditioning us." He explained that Annika had a much grander vision. She had the plan, the intellect, and the cold-blooded ambition. She recruited them, turning their petty crimes into a multi-million-dollar operation built on stolen identities and faked deaths. Daniel was the front man, the actor. Silas was the tech support. But Annika was the director, the writer, the producer. She was the one who pulled every string. "So Daniel worked for her," Miller clarified. "She was the boss." "Always," Silas confirmed. Ilara leaned forward, her heart pounding. This was it, the confirmation. But a single crucial question remained. "Then why did he fake his death with me?" she whispered to Jordan, though no one on the other side of the glass could hear. "Why was I the last one?" As if hearing her thoughts, Miller asked the same question. "So, what happened in Gary? Why the final disappearing act with Ilara Vance?" Silas looked down at his hands on the table. A shadow of real pain crossed his face. "That one," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. "That one was different. Daniel fell in love with her, for real. He was tired of the lies, tired of Annika. He wanted out. He told me he was going to take the money he'd stashed and just be Marcus Vance. He wanted a real life. With Ilara." The confession hit Ilara with the force of a physical blow, a flicker of the love she thought she'd had. a memory of the man she thought she knew, pierced through the layers of betrayal. He had loved her. Annika wouldn't allow that, Silas continued, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and grief. No one leaves her organization. He staged the final death, the car crash, to throw her off his trail. He was planning to lay low for a year, and then come back to Alara, tell her everything, and beg her to run away with him. So the car crash on I-90 was a fake, just like the others? Miller pressed. Silas looked up, his eyes filled with a chilling certainty. That's what Daniel planned, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But I don't think that's what happened. Annika is meticulous. She would have known he was planning to betray her. She would have seen it as the ultimate disloyalty. He took a shaky breath. I think Annika made sure that this time the accident was real. I think she murdered my brother. The air in the observation room grew thick and cold. Silas's accusation that Annika had murdered his brother, her own star operative, wasn't just a theory. It was a conviction born from years of witnessing her ruthless efficiency. Daniel's desire for a real life with Alara hadn't been a chance for redemption. It had been a death sentence. Alara felt a dizzying mix of emotions. The man she had mourned was a liar and a criminal. The man who had used her had also, apparently, loved her. And the woman who had orchestrated it all had likely killed him for it. The truth was a tangled, horrifying mess, and every thread she pulled revealed a deeper layer of darkness. Inside the interrogation room, Miller leaned forward, his voice low and intense. You think she killed him. Can you prove it? Silas shook his head, a look of utter defeat on his face. No, that's the point. She's too smart for that. The official report was clear. A tragic accident, a tired truck driver, bad road conditions, no evidence of foul play. She creates stories the world wants to believe. It's what she does. He slumped back in his chair. She used me to build a digital fortress around her operations, to erase her tracks. But I know her. Her motive is more than just money. For the next hour, under the steady, methodical questioning of Detective Miller, Silas laid bare the entire history of Annika Sharma's criminal empire. It was a story of cold, calculated vengeance. Annika's family, years ago, had been wealthy, part of Chicago's old money elite. But her father, a trusting businessman, had invested their entire fortune in a pharmaceutical startup that turned out to be a massive fraud. The corporation behind it collapsed, but the executives, protected by high-priced lawyers from firms like Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch, walked away with millions. Annika's family was ruined. Her father, disgraced and broke, took his own life. Annika, then a brilliant medical student, watched the system she was raised to believe in utterly fail her. She saw how wealth, power, and the law protected the guilty and crushed the innocent. So she decided to become the system, a darker, more efficient version of it. It started as revenge, Silas explained. She targeted the fortunes of men who reminded her of the ones who destroyed her father. But it grew. It became about power, about proving she was smarter than all of them. Her methodology was genius in its depravity. As a leading oncologist, she had access to a steady stream of what she called phantoms, patients in their final stages of life, often alone, with no close family. She would study their files, find one with a similar build and age to Daniel. With Silas's help, she would create a new identity for Daniel based on the dying patient, forging birth certificates, driver's licenses, and social security numbers. Daniel would then enter the life of their target, the widow-to-be. He would be the perfect man, charming and attentive, while subtly gathering the information Annika needed. When the time was right, Annika would get word that the original patient had passed away. That was the signal. She would procure the body from the morgue, often using her credentials and a fabricated story about a family request for a private autopsy. She'd have the body for a few hours, Silas said, his voice hollow. Long enough to prepare it. He swallowed hard. Tattoos, dental records. Sometimes she'd have to break bones to match old injuries. She was a doctor. She knew anatomy. They would plant the prepared body, stage the accident, a fire, a boating mishap, a car crash, and Daniel would disappear, his old identity buried along with a stranger's corpse. The grieving widow would be left with a life insurance payout, which Annika would then launder through a web of offshore accounts. She called it Balancing the scales, Silas whispered, taking from the system that had taken everything from her. Alara felt sick. The mole on Marcus's neck that she had used to identify his body. Had it been real, or had it been carved there by Annika's steady surgical hand? The thought was a violation, a desecration of her most intimate memories. So Daniel wanted out, Miller said, bringing the story back to the present. He was your only family. Why didn't you go with him? I was scared, Silas admitted, shamefaced. I was scared of her. Daniel was brave. I'm a coward. I stay in the shadows. He looked up, his eyes pleading. But he was trying to protect me, even at the end. He knew Annika would come for me next. I was the only other person who knew everything. He told me he was creating an insurance policy. A dead man's switch. All the proof. All of Annika's records. Her entire ledger hidden away. He said if anything happened to him, I would know where to find it. And where is it? Jordan breathed from behind the glass. I don't know, Silas said, his voice breaking. He was supposed to tell me the location the week after the crash, but he never got the chance. He buried his face in his hands. She killed him before he could, and now I have no proof, nothing to protect me. She's going to kill me too. I know it. The confession was complete. They had the motive, the method, the entire grotesque history of the operation. But they were facing a terrible, frustrating truth. They had the word of a co-conspirator, but no physical evidence to tie Annika to a single crime. Least of all, the murder of Daniel Oluwade. Annika, the untouchable queen, remained protected behind a wall of plausible deniability. Silas had given them the story of the mastermind, but he couldn't give them the weapon to defeat her. They were trapped in a stalemate, and the clock was ticking before Annika decided to eliminate the last two people who could expose her, Silas, and now, them. The days that followed Silas's confession were a special kind of hell. They were trapped in a legal no-man's land. The district attorney had Silas's testimony, but without corroborating evidence, it was the word of an admitted felon against a beloved, high-profile doctor. The DA wouldn't risk her career on a case she couldn't win. Annika Sharma remained free, attending charity galas and performing life-saving surgery, a monster hiding in plain sight. The threat of her hung over Alara and Jordan, a constant low-grade terror. Miller had flown back to Detroit, hitting his own bureaucratic walls. Silas was in protective custody, but for how long? The system was failing them again. Alara couldn't sleep. She paced Jordan's apartment, her mind endlessly replaying conversations with Marcus, or Daniel. She was searching for a clue, a slip of the tongue, anything he might have said that she had dismissed as unimportant at the time. His words about his insurance policy, the dead man's switch Silas had mentioned, echoed in her head, and then it hit her. A memory from a lazy Sunday afternoon, about a year into their marriage. They were looking at real estate listings online, a fantasy game they liked to play. He had pointed to a small, cheap parcel of land on the outskirts of Gary. It was nothing more than a patch of weeds with a dilapidated one-car garage on it. That's my fallback plan, he joked, his arm around her. When the zombie apocalypse comes, that's where I'll build my bunker, totally off the grid, a place to keep my real treasures safe. She'd laughed it off, a bunker in Gary, but now the words took on a new urgent meaning. Off the grid, a place to keep my real treasures safe, an insurance policy. She called Jordan, who was at her own apartment trying to get some rest. The dog was all business, his nose to the ground, working in a grid pattern. Alara's heart pounded. Was this it? Was she about to uncover the real body of her husband, buried in a shallow grave? Blue swept the property, his tail low and methodical. He showed no interest in the overgrown field or the crumbling foundation of a long-gone house. Then, the handler led him toward the garage. The moment they stepped inside the dark, dusty space, Blue's entire demeanor changed. He didn't give the sharp, sudden bark that signaled human remains. Instead, he began to whine, a low, insistent sound. He paced a small area in the center of the garage, his nose pressed to the cracked concrete floor. Then, he began to scratch at it, his claws making a sharp, frantic scraping sound. "What is it?" Alara asked, her voice trembling. The handler knelt, running a hand over the dog's back. "He's on something. Strong scent. But it's not decomp. It's something else." something he was trained to find as a secondary scent. Electronics, batteries, circuit boards. They give off a specific odor as they break down. Miller came over, shining a powerful flashlight on the spot. At first, it looked like the rest of the floor, but as he swept the beam across it, they could see it. A perfectly square section, about 3 feet by 3 feet, where the color of the concrete was just slightly lighter, the texture a little smoother. It was a patch, a new pour. Without a word, Miller went back to his trunk and returned with a sledgehammer and a crowbar. The first blow of the sledgehammer against the concrete echoed like a gunshot in the silent rural air. Miller grunted with the effort, swinging again and again. A web of cracks appeared. He switched to the crowbar, wedging it into a crack and putting his full weight on it. With a loud groan and a cloud of dust, a chunk of the concrete broke free. Underneath wasn't dirt. It was the corner of a black, hard-shell case. Working faster now, they broke away the rest of the concrete square. Nestled in a shallow pit, wrapped in plastic, was a large pelican case, the kind used to protect sensitive equipment. It was heavy. Miller and the handler lifted it out and placed it on the ground. Alara knelt, her fingers tracing the latches. This was it. The insurance policy. The dead man's switch. The final message from the man she knew as Marcus Vance. With a series of loud clicks, Miller unfastened the latches and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was a single, pristine laptop. Next to it was a sealed envelope with one word written on it in Marcus's familiar handwriting: Ilara. It wasn't a grave they had found. It was an arsenal, and it was aimed directly at the heart of Annika Sharma's empire. The discovery of the laptop changed everything. The stalemate was broken. Back in a secure room at the federal building, a cybercrime expert cracked the laptop's simple password, Ilara, and its contents spilled onto the screen like a ghost's last will and testament. It was all there, a meticulous, damning archive of Annika's entire operation. Scanned copies of the real death certificates of the phantoms, audio recordings of Daniel's phone conversations with Annika, where she gave him explicit instructions, and a detailed ledger of her offshore bank accounts, tracking every laundered dollar. But the most damning file was the last one, a video. Daniel, looking tired and haunted, stared directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this, it means Annika got to me," he began, his voice heavy with resignation. "Her name is Annika Sharma. She's the one behind it all." He went on to detail everything, his voice a mixture of confession and accusation. He ended the video with a direct warning. "She's planning to clean house. After me, she's coming for Silas. She thinks he's a liability. She told me her plan." He described how Annika was going to frame Silas for the entire operation and then arrange for him to be killed in prison. They had her. It was ironclad. Checkmate. "We have enough to put her away for 1,000 years, Miller said, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "But I don't just want to arrest her. I want to crush her. I want her to walk into the trap herself." They devised a plan, elegant in its simplicity. They would use Annika's own arrogance against her. Jordan, playing the role of a terrified lawyer in over her head, would call Annika. The pretext: Silas had escaped federal custody. He was panicked, on the run, and demanding his final payout from Annika before he disappeared for good. He had chosen a meeting spot and a time, tonight. "She'll be suspicious," Alara said. "She's too smart to fall for something so obvious." "Normally, yes," Miller countered, "but her two weaknesses are her ego and her need for control. The thought of Silas being a loose cannon she can't manage will be intolerable to her. She won't be able to resist handling it herself. She'll come." The meeting spot was a desolate, little-used park on the edge of Lake Michigan, a place of isolated walking trails and shadowy groves of trees. As dusk fell, a team of plainclothes federal agents and Chicago PD officers moved into position, melting into the landscape. Alara, Jordan, and Miller waited in an unmarked van with a view of the designated meeting point, a solitary park bench overlooking the dark, choppy water. Ilara's heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car horn sent a jolt of anxiety through her. What if Annika didn't come? What if she sent someone else? Then, they saw her. Annika's black Audi pulled silently into the parking lot. She got out, dressed in expensive athletic wear, looking like any other wealthy Chicagoan out for an evening jog. But there was nothing casual about the way she scanned the area, her eyes missing nothing. She was a predator surveying her territory. She walked calmly toward the bench, her purse clutched in her hand. The trap was set. The moment she reached the bench and saw that it was empty, the signal was given. "Go!" Miller barked into his radio. From all directions, the agents emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. "I think I know where it is," Ilara said, her voice electric with a desperate hope. The next morning, armed with the property records Jordan had managed to pull, the land was owned by a shell company, another one of Silas's creations. They met Detective Miller. He had flown back in, convinced by the sheer conviction in Ilara's voice. "It's a long shot, Vance," he said, looking at the map, "but it's the only shot we've got." The property was even more derelict than she remembered. The weeds were waist-high. The garage sagged, its paint peeling, its windows broken. A sense of defeat began to creep in. It looked like a place where things went to die, not a place where secrets were kept. Miller, however, had come prepared. If your husband was paranoid enough to build a dead man's switch, he might have been paranoid about someone else finding it. Or he might have hidden something more visceral. He went to the trunk of his unmarked car and opened it. A large dog crate was inside. From it emerged a handsome, focused-looking German shepherd wearing a police harness. "This is Blue," Miller said. "He's a cadaver dog. Let's see if your husband's treasures are the kind that decay." The handler, a quiet, professional state trooper, led Blue out of the car. "FBI, don't move! Hands where I can see them!" For the first time since they'd met her, Annika Sharma's composure broke. It wasn't fear on her face, but pure, undiluted rage. A flash of disbelief that her perfect, controlled world was collapsing. She was surrounded, with no way out. Miller, Jordan, and Ilara got out of the van and approached as she was being cuffed. Annika's eyes found Ilara's, and her face twisted into a sneer of contempt. "You!" she spat, the word dripping with venom. "It was you, the sentimental little cleaning lady from Gary. He got weak because of you. He was a magnificent instrument, and you ruined him." "It's over, Annika," Miller said, reading her rights. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that was a world away from her smooth, doctorly voice. "Over? You have no idea." As two agents began to lead her away toward a squad car, she stopped and turned, her eyes locking onto Ilara's one last time. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, a final poisoned dart. "You have the laptop. Very clever," she said, a small chilling smile playing on her lips. "But you're a fool if you think that was the only copy. I always have a contingency for my contingencies." She took a step closer, the agents tightening their grip on her arms. "My network is larger than you can possibly imagine. There will always be someone else to finish the work. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering if the person standing next to you is one of mine. You'll never be safe." The threat hung in the cold night air, more terrifying than any promise of physical violence. It wasn't a threat of death. It was a threat of a life sentence of paranoia. With those final words, she allowed herself to be led away, leaving Ilara standing by the dark lake, the victory suddenly feeling hollow and terrifyingly incomplete. The trial of Dr. Annika Sharma was a media circus. The story of the brilliant high society doctor living a double life as a criminal mastermind was irresistible. But for Ilara, it was an ordeal. She sat in the courtroom day after day, listening to the sordid details of the life she had unknowingly been a part of. Annika, true to form, never cracked. She sat at the defense table with an air of regal indifference, as if the proceedings were a minor inconvenience. The evidence from the laptop was overwhelming, and the jury's guilty verdict was a formality. The judge sentenced her to consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Justice was served. The monster was caged. But Annika's final words in the park proved to be their own kind of life sentence. The threat of her network lingered, a poison seeping into Ilara's life. Every new person she met, every friendly stranger, was viewed through a lens of suspicion. The world no longer felt safe. It felt like a stage, and she could never be sure who was an actor. Peace did not follow justice. Her life in Gary, once a place of quiet grief, now felt like a place of exposure. She couldn't stay there. She packed her few belongings and left the small apartment, the ghost of Marcus, and the city of her past behind. Jordan, too, found herself at a crossroads. The case had exposed the ugly underbelly of the world she had fought so hard to join. The casual racism, the moral compromises, the way justice was often a commodity for the rich. As she could no longer stomach it, she resigned from Sterling, Cromwell, and Finch, turning her back on a lucrative career path. A few months after the trial, Jordan called Alara. She had used her savings to lease a small, unglamorous office on the south side of Gary, not far from where Alara used to live. "I'm opening my own practice," Jordan announced, her voice filled with a new, steely purpose. A real one. For people who can't afford the sharks downtown. For people the system ignores. Alara was happy for her, but the news felt distant, part of a world she no longer belonged to. She was adrift, working a temp job, living in a cheap, anonymous apartment in a Chicago suburb, trying to be invisible. "That's why I'm calling," Jordan continued. "I need a partner, not a lawyer. I need an investigator." Alara was silent. "Jordan, I'm not an investigator. I'm just—" "What?" Jordan interrupted, her voice sharp but not unkind. "A victim? A survivor? No. You're the woman who saw a clue no one else did. You're the one who trusted her gut and followed a ghost. You navigated a world of lies and uncovered a conspiracy the police couldn't even see. Alara, no one on this planet understands deception better than you do right now. That experience isn't a tragedy you need to get over. It's a weapon. I need that weapon." The offer was a lifeline, but not in the way Alara had expected. It wasn't a path to healing or forgetting. It was a path that led directly back into the darkness she had just escaped. But it was also a path to purpose, a way to channel the paranoia, the hypervigilance, the scars Annika had left her with, into something useful. The final scene of this chapter in Alara's life doesn't take place in a support group or a philanthropist's gala. It takes place 6 months later, in a cluttered, fluorescent-lit office that smells of stale coffee and determination. Alara Vance sits at a metal desk, a stack of files in front of her. She is no longer a clerical assistant or a grieving widow. She is a legal investigator. She's examining a new case file. A woman who claims her elderly father was swindled out of his life savings by a contractor who has since vanished. The details are familiar. The charm, the trust, the disappearance. As Alara reads, her focus is absolute. Her eyes, which once held the soft sadness of grief, are now sharp, analytical, missing nothing. The paranoia that Annika instilled in her has been honed into a professional tool. She sees the patterns, the inconsistencies, the lies hidden between the lines. Her past is not a ghost she is trying to outrun. It is the lens through which she now sees the world. Justice hadn't brought her peace, and her life would never be simple or easy again. But it had brought her a cold, hard clarity. The final lesson wasn't that good triumphs over evil or that healing is always possible. It was that sometimes the only way to fight the monsters of the world is to understand them, and Alara Vance understood them better than anyone. Her work wasn't about finding closure. It was about kicking over rocks and exposing the darkness underneath, one case at a time. Her life was no longer about healing. It was about the fight, and she was finally fully armed.